Throughout his career, Carl Jung takes pot shots at yoga. And today we are going to be examining Jung's harshest critique of yoga together. So I've been a yoga teacher for the past 12 years. I run a YouTube channel on yoga. But as I'm sure you know, Western yoga is very flawed because it's deeper than the corporate McYoga studios or the superficial women or the predator man bun yogis. It's that yoga axiomatically is not suited for the Western mind, body, and heart. And we're about to hear Carl Jung talk about this right now. Quote, "My criticism is directed solely against the application of yoga to the people of the West. The spiritual development of the West has been along entirely different lines from that of the East, and has therefore produced conditions which are the most unfavorable soil one can think for the application of yoga. Western civilization is scarcely 1,000 years old, and must first of all free itself from its barbarous one-sidedness. This means, above all, deeper insight into the nature of man. But no insight is gained by repressing and controlling the unconscious, and least of all by imitating methods which have grown up under totally different psychological conditions. In the course of the centuries, the West will produce its own yoga." And this is the haymaker point by Jung. If we, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism are easy pickings in terms of their contrast to a yogi lifestyle. But even if we look at early pagan society in Europe, in the Middle East, it's nowhere close to what the yogis were doing. The most adept individuals in the West were not able to access higher consciousness, samadhi. They had no meditation, breath work, asana, an ethical system that was all meant to help you raise up higher in the chakras, higher in consciousness. There were consciousness raising activities in paganism and all the Abrahamic religions, but in comparison to what Buddhists, Hindus, yogis, whoever were figuring out in the East, it lacks in comparison. And we're talking about 2,500 to 4,000 years that they've been behind. And the trajectory of the West the entire time has been going a different direction. And those bases, the dialect, is ambition versus non-ambition. To succeed in yoga, and when I say yoga, I don't mean asana. I'm not talking about stretching. I'm talking about Ashtanga yoga, Raja yoga, Karmic yoga, Bhakti yoga. All of those disciplines are very slow. There is no reward. There is no heaven or women, money, fame, wealth at the end of those. The end of those is total renunciation from society and connecting with oneness in a cave or in society, but still, it's somewhat similar to monkhood lifestyle that we have seen in the West, but with an extreme emphasis on consciousness raising activities. So we, in every single practice, including psychoanalytic thought, have been divergent from the East, because the East has its own psychology, its own way to move through the unconscious. That's what you could say yoga is. It's all just psychology. It's all personal development and understanding yourself deeper. So the East has been doing psychology forever, but the West finally came to it with Sigmund Freud and, German idealism and whatnot in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And we came from it at a very logical level as a branch of philosophy. Just how Heidegger in Being and Time is discussing principles known in yoga forever, but he's using it within the Western philosophical canon, which is thousands of times more meta than the Eastern philosophy. Once again, there's a divergence. Eastern philosophy only goes as far as things that will help connect you to the divine. But Western philosophy is, arguing about if the divine even exists, and logic and reason and epistemology and yada, yada, yada. And so one of my favorite analogies to understand all this, everyone, is the ego. We always hear all the time, like, you need to lose your ego. Guy's got such an ego. And what does that mean? Because do you really want to lose your ego? Because the ego is I. It is you. It is your personality. And there are great parts of your ego. Like, oh my God, think of it as the ego as your character. Your character has some great things and it has some bad things. However, if we get rid of the ego, and there's a way to do it, if you take a lot of acid, if you just go super ham with pranayama and meditation and renunciation, you can obliterate a lot of those aspects of your character. But you eliminate both good and bad. You can't really control it unless you're very masterful. And so I don't know if you guys have known people who have lost their ego, but they're just blobs. They literally are doing nothing. They don't think anything. I have so many, old friends who I lived with in Oregon who just went down that path and it bared them no fruit. In the West, the best idea for all of us, and this is what Jung talks about, is to build your ego, to change the negative traits and to add on more positive traits, to build and boast your ego and not move away from life, not renunciate, but to live life more. And that is the solution. That is what we've been barred from doing by Christianity. One of my high school buddies has always been very into women, but he now is in a marriage with multiple kids. But I had to stop talking to him because every time we talked, he was just always complaining about his wife and his life. I don't get this. I don't get that. And I've always just said, then dude, just leave. You're literally suicidal, having to go on meds because you're not choosing to live more. And so what starts to happen in our society, because people can't make that choice. They don't want to live more. They don't want to grow, because in the West, that is where growth happens. If you live more and keep breaking the boundaries in your mind, in life, whatever, you're going to run into bigger and bigger problems. The obstacles don't get easier, because to grow, your goals have to get bigger. I want to create 1 billion new readers. I have 2.7K subs right now. To get to that point, I'm going to have to grow and push into a person I can't even fathom. And so what people do to avoid this is they mix renunciation with a Western lifestyle. So I know this, I've been involved in the spiritual and yoga community since, like I said, 12, 13 years ago at least. And I know so many people that they meditate and they don't get emotional. They don't focus on negativity and they do all this, but they have a day job and they like to eat good food and they're still, lustful and not really trying. They're like picking and choosing and trying to combine the systems, and that never works. You need to do one or the other. And renunciation, and once again, I've known many guys who have gone into monkhood, who have tried to become monks, and it's never worked. There's a very famous writer, Gary Snyder, right here. He was one of the characters in Jack Kerouac's Dharma Bum, that one that goes to Japan. He tried to go to Japan and become a monk, but he couldn't do it. And once he realized at some point, if I come back and I live and I focus on what I care about as an eco-poet, conservationist, yada, 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 I will live life to the fullest. Funny story about Gary Snyder. One time I had this very SJW professor, and he said, do you know, he was saying something about Gary Snyder's Turtle Island. I was like, oh my God, I love that book. This one right here. And then he was like, oh, well, that book is racist. Anyway, so mixing and matching and monkhood really don't work. There are a band of people who have immigrated to the tropics, to Bali, to India to live there. And when I meet those people who have been, practicing meditation, pranayama, and yoga and making that the only part of their life, most of the time they still have a lot of problems. There's a guy, I've known a guy for about 10 years, and he's one of the big stars now in the Ashtanga Vinyasa community. He's one of the top teachers that's certified by the lineage holder. And the only reason he started doing yoga was to get with women, was to exploit them. And I had to stop being his friend when I realized that's what he was doing. But I heard from a mutual friend maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and she said that he's still doing the same thing, just at a higher level now. And so all of us grew up with competition. We were graded since day one. We've been regimented like cattle in the education system and from our parents and at jobs to turn into people who are competitive. As someone who has felt non-ambition and taken years off of life, it's very hard to be competitive about dumb things. I know people, when they maybe do a sport for the first time and they're doing it, they get frustrated and they have meltdowns and they get all angry. And it's like, why are you being ambitious about this? You're not going to be the next pro player. You should be having fun and you'll make more progress that way. And so it melts into everything. And worst of all, it melts into yoga. Most Westerners can bring a very competitive mindset to yoga. They think they need to keep moving on and keep getting better. I got stuck in this for a while. I advanced very deep into my asana practice, and I realized, like, wait, this isn't making me more spiritual. I've basically gotten 99% of the benefit here, and I can now maintain and focus on breath work, meditation, karmic, using yoga in reality, spreading light to the world. But even that wasn't enough. It wasn't until I really started to try to build my character, to focus on Jungian active imagination and archetypes, that I really solved a lot of the inner issues that I have. If you go back 6 years ago, I was meditating over an hour a day, doing asana 2 hours a day, probably breath work for an hour a day, being very mindful and taking walks and controlling my emotions. And that helped in countless ways, but a lot of my core problems didn't get fixed until I took a lot of that time and transferred it over to more Western approaches, because the West is adapting. We are creating our own yoga. That's what Jung ends with, that we will produce our own yoga, because yoga is not Indian. Yoga really means the ability to create energy and make it flow around the body, the soul, whatever we want to call it. And so the Indian method is the most advanced and has one of the higher chances to be able to show you those higher states of consciousness while sober. But there are other ways, when you look at it from that definition, to achieve that goal. And another question that bears asking is, how much do I need? How much realization and consciousness do I need to then go take action in the world? Because I have, at my deepest meditation points, connected into oneness and like astrally projected at like insane levels. But I was seeing things that were too far out. I was seeing goals and realities that would require me to become a person. And I think that's another part of the Western mindset that creeps in, because in the East, they see this reality, they see the pain of the universe, they see everything that's happening, and they renounce it. They say, this is not my responsibility, even though I should do my part. This isn't my responsibility to fix that. But every time I've ever reached those heights, I see it and I'm like, oh my God, we live in a very violent system, even in the United States. Like the words and attitudes of people are very aggressive and negative. But to fix that problem, everyone, I am going to have to spend every waking second becoming the Ubermensch, the Superman. And this is what Nietzsche realized. This is what all these guys realized at some point. They're like, wait, we need to go 100% active. The yogi, the master yogi, is 100% passive and in tune. And you could say even working with energy because they're so connected. But on the opposite side, the active nihilist, the Ubermensch, they are 100% action. But we know where the Ubermensch mentality got us in the early 20th century with 300 million people dead. And we know where the Indian attitude got us, because India had the caste system the entire time with all these enlightened people. They were very brutal. They had a caste system. Still to this day, India is one of the worst places to be, maybe other than the Middle East, as a woman. The amount of sexual assaults and weird attitudes relating to that in India are astounding. So I'm also here not to romanticize one side and say one is better than the other. But for most of us, and even a lot of people in India now, like even Indians who have been, raised in a Western society just because of globalism, colonialism, and whatnot, a lot of these old practices and these old ways are pretty inaccessible. And like I said, I really view yoga, the creation and flow of energy, as more of a utility, as something that can help me obviously stay healthy and to also help me reach a certain point and then I can bring my lifestyle and my character to that point. Because in the East, when you have this base and everyone is spiritual, everyone knows how to do this, then ambition comes after that. Then non-ambition leads to ambition. But we have no social reinforcement here. And because social reinforcement is bigger than your social circle. Every single person in my social circle mostly does yoga, is mostly pretty spiritual, very positive toward me, very supportive. But just driving in the world and seeing everyone else lets me know that that's all a lie. That's an echo chamber. And I should also say that Jung actually likes yoga. He views it as a very deep system. He enjoys Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. He views yoga bigger than that. He views it bigger than the Upanishads. Another German thinker in Jung's lineage at some level with the unconscious is Arthur Schopenhauer. He was very into the Upanishads. And so this is just an intro to Jung on yoga, because Jung has a lot to say about yoga. We'll be breaking that down in further videos about Carl Jung and yoga. So if you guys want to see more Jungian videos, I have a playlist up here I've started on Carl Jung. Make sure to save that, because I'm planning to make a couple Carl Jung videos a week. And one of the main topics we will be starting with is Jung on yoga, and also just some beginner Jungian stuff. So let me know your thoughts, your comments. I love to talk yoga. I'd love to hear from you guys about what was said here today. And let's go find that balance between ambition and non-ambition and change the world.